Hello, everybody. I'm Ed Parcaut, the host of Helping the Brave. Let's bring in our guest today, Tina Erwin, I assume. Tina, are you there? Tina, now you're muted, Tina. You're muted on the screen there at the bottom to the left.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, I can. You actually hear me now. All right, let's try. Let's
I
keep
can hear you
going.
now.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you just fine.
All right, sounds good. Turn that up a little bit, and this one here too. All right, so Helping the Brave, it's a podcast for us veterans once we take the uniform off, but they'll always ask pretty much the same questions in the beginning. I already know your answers because I already researched you, but not everybody else is going to know those. So what service did you choose, and why did you pick that service?
I joined the Navy in 1972, which seems like an eternity ago, because in 1972, if you were female, when you walked into a job interview, the pay was cut in half. And I am not a martyr, so I didn't want to spend the rest of my life fighting for equal pay because the military paid the same. But it was at the height of the Vietnam War. We're trying to get out. It was really a very contentious time. And so I applied to the Air Force. I haven't heard yet, but I have good opportunity there. And then I applied to the Navy. And apparently a lot of people applied. And for some reason, maybe it was a karmic thing, but I applied on 1 August. I was accepted on 1 September, and I went to the October Officer Candidate School class because in 1972, that was the only way women could join the military.
As officers?
And as officers, no, as going to, well, yes, as officers. And I went, it was such a cool thing. I went to my recruiter's office in downtown Greensboro, North Carolina, and there was a Master Chief Petty Officer there, and he just thought I was adorable. And he helped me. And I was the first female naval officer they had from the state of North Carolina, I think, ever. And he was so thrilled. And he walked my application through the Pentagon. Sweetest guy. Never forget him. Funny how the people who influence you, you remember for the rest of your life. And on my very first day at my very first duty station, which was supervisor shipbuilding, conversion and repair in Groton, Connecticut, building submarines, I met my husband. And 51 years later, we're still married.
Wow.
So, yeah, I worked for the submarine force for 20 years, retired at the commander level, and I loved the Navy. I had a wonderful career. I had some bad days like everybody does, but I found the military to be an astonishing schoolhouse, and I'm grateful for every day I served.
Well, I mean, the positive thing being a female, you couldn't go on a submarine, right?
Well, I've been on every class of submarine
No,
except
what I mean, you
Seawolf,
couldn't get stationed
and
on a submarine.
you couldn't spend the night. You could not spend the night. That was a congressional law, unless, of course, you were CIA. And then, of course, there are a lot of women who spent the night on submarines who were part of the intelligence services. But women naval officers could not do that at the time. And I think that it took a lot of us to pave some ways to open the doors because the bottom line was there simply are not enough men. And men do great on submarines, but there was reaching a point, and I had a conversation with Chief of Naval Operations in 1978, and I remember him telling me that we need women, officer and enlisted. There's simply not enough men, and that opened up a doorway. And you never look an important opportunity two ways. You just go for it. And I was given astonishing opportunities, responsibility, got to open doorways, and it was it was an amazing time. So I had a great career, no complaints.
Right. And you retired, so 20 years?
I retired at 20 years. My husband retired at 24.
Okay. And what did just since you brought him up, what did he do in the Navy?
He drove submarines. He was navigator and weapons officer.
Officer.
He was officer. He retired at the commander level too. We were Mr. and Mrs. Navy. And when we got married, we were one of the very first female. We were one of the very first married couples in the Navy, 70s.
Well,
And they kind of didn't know what to do with us, so we told them how we could be stationed together. And he had a career. It was explained to me very bluntly that he had the career. I had a job. So I had to take anything they gave me. And, you can make a lot of wonderful things from lemons. You just have to see the opportunities as they present themselves.
and so over the 20 years, where did you get stationed? I mean, I know you had to you didn't follow your husband everywhere, did you?
We made a 5-year plan so that we would hit the marks. You had to be a division officer and a department head, and then screen for XO, and then screen for command. So if you had to hit those marks to get promoted, and if you did that, then you had to determine where were the jobs for both of us. And I had to be so good that I was worth finding a job for. And for most of the 20, well, actually the whole 20 years, the submarine force took over detailing me personally, and we were stationed together for 20 years. And
Wow.
we started out in New London, Connecticut, and I received for all the crypto gear for all fast attack 688 class new construction submarines. And then we were sent to Naples, Italy. We had a 3-year tour in Italy, and he was attached to the submarine Group 8 staff. And I was Naval Communication Area Master Station Mediterranean. And we did the entire broadcast for the Mediterranean for U.S. forces and all NATO forces. And then we went to Charleston, and we had 2 kids there. And then I went, and he was on Tecumseh in Charleston. Was on Benjamin Franklin in New London. And then we went to Norfolk, and he had command of a submarine rescue ship. And he actually pulled up the piece of Challenger, the O-ring that went bad on Challenger. He pulled up that piece.
Wow.
And I was responsible.
For people who don't know, for people who don't know, Challenger is the space shuttle that blew up, and that's the O-ring from it that they said was the problem. Correct.
And he found the O-ring and the burned portion. Another ship like his found the bodies. My job, working for Submarine Force Atlantic Fleet, I was the Assistant Chief of Staff for Force Physical Security, Anti-Terrorism, and Law Enforcement for 86 submarines, 9 submarine tenders, and 3 submarine bases, and the Senior Jewish Admiral in the Navy. And my guidance was don't screw up. And so I designed equipment that protected submarines from terrorist attack. And my equipment is still in the fleet today. The devices and things they're using on bases are still used to this day. So I got to say that I made a difference.
So you got out in 92.
I got out in 92. Yep.
Yeah, if I did my numbers correctly. And that was the Iraq war, right? Still somewhat going on.
Yes. Yeah.
I only know that because I missed it by 2 days. I was in the Navy. I was a corpsman stationed with the Marines at Camp Pendleton. And when I went to physical therapy, a lot of other stuff, and I only had like 5 months and so many days left on delayed where they could pull you back in. And I missed it by 2 days, the war, which a lot of people are like, well, wouldn't you want to go? And it's like, no, I would have been stationed with the Marines. Why would I want? Back then, it wasn't, if you were physical therapy, it didn't matter. You go with the Marines if you were stationed at the Marines and you actually had that training. And it's like, I don't want to go back in. And I had my bachelor's and master's at the time. And they're like, why don't you become an officer? And I'm like, because I get stuck on a ship.
Yeah.
I was the only Navy guy never got stationed on a ship. So,
yeah. It happens.
Yeah, I was with the Marines. So what do you want? But I didn't even go anywhere on a ship or anything on a ship. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton, went to physical therapy school, got stationed back at Camp Pendleton. Now, my next tour would have been somewhere potentially that, had something to do with the ship. But I just didn't, it would have been nice to be an officer, but it was also nicer not to be stationed on a ship for a while.
I understand.
Yeah. I'd much rather be, and I don't even want to be on a 40-foot yacht or anything. That's just not my thing. I'm a land guy, which is very shocking that I was in the Navy, and I prefer the mountains. All right. So you were in for 20 years. It sounds like you had an amazing time. especially for
Yeah, I
during
did.
the Vietnam, at the end of the Vietnam War, and closing all that down and everything you did. When you got transitioned out, how was that transition? Was there like a whole thing for you, or was it at the time they're like, okay, we don't need you anymore. Have a nice day.
I screened for major command, and they offered me every commander command the Navy had. I don't know why I got to be so special. There were 14 commands, and they
'Cause
offered me all 14 of them.
you were the only female, right?
No, 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 no. There were several women who screened for major command, and this would have been in the 90s,
Right.
early 90s, or late 80s. And I screened for major command, and I was really honored because I did a lot for the submarine force. And there's a karma attached to how long you work somewhere. And I felt the karma with the Navy was over, and I said, I'm coming up on 20. I'm going to get out. And I started a computer company, and I designed software, and I had this whole plan. And a lot of people were really mad at me for leaving. And it's like, guys, if I leave, that'll open the door for somebody else, and they'll get to have major command. And I don't need it. I've done amazing things. I'm thrilled with what I got to do. Time to do something else. And so I started a computer company, and my transition was super easy. It was much harder for my husband. So,
Because well, let's stay on you. We can have your husband come on at a later date. And I don't mean that wrong. I want to focus on what you did, because you have an amazing career.
I understand.
Yeah, you have an amazing career. I want to highlight that. And also, there's some other stuff that about ghosts and everything else I want to get into also. Right? Or no, that's the wrong. Yeah, that's you. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry.
So,
It's
yeah, we retired. We were in San Diego, and we retired from San Diego. It was a great place.
Yeah, I got stationed. That's where I was stationed at Camp Pendleton, right outside of San Diego, and I loved it down there. I was down there after I got out for 20 years, and then ended up moving to Northern California. But for me, the military was a great time after the fact, if you understand what I mean. When you're in, it's not always the best thing, but then when you go back at it, it's like women with childbirth. If they remembered how bad it really was, they wouldn't have any more. And that's the same if you're in the Navy, if you're in the military. It might not be great right this moment, but then things will change, and you'll look back and go, that was a really good time. So.
Exactly. You have a lot of lessons that are offered to you, and how you approach responding to the lessons that are offered determine basically the rest of your life. And you also develop a certain love of country that you would not have imagined you could feel for the time, however short or long you were in.
Now, while you're in 20 years, and did you see a change towards women while you were in? Because I've heard from some people that during that period of time, over that 20 years that you were in, it got worse for women.
Well, I was very meticulous in how I approached things, and I watched the frustration that men had. It's a boys club. I mean, the submarine force is this all boys club, and I opened up a lot of doors. I was the first female instructor in the history of submarine school. I was first female XO for a submarine training facility. And I mean, I got to do some pretty astounding things. And what happened was, you have to earn respect. I mean, the submarine force just eats you for lunch. And if you think you're really special, you need to go look in the mirror, and you're just really ordinary. And if you don't have a value to what you're putting forth, they really don't have time for you, and they don't care if you're male or female. And when you're confronted what appears to be discrimination, you can handle it with a little humor. I had one guy say, you're so good at what you do, I forgot you're female. And I said, no, I'm gonna have to change my perfume. And I had one guy get so mad at me. He said, he was swearing, you're just like my ex-wife. And I said, obviously she was a lovely person. I would have loved her. And the whole room broke up. He didn't laugh. He got mad at me, and he said, he was in the middle of a divorce. Something about me reminded him of her. And I said, that's not my fault. And it's not your fault. We need to come to an accommodation. And so I decided that I needed to move departments. So I got a new boss. And then actually I had a 2-star as my boss, because he said, from now on, you work for me, but you can go sit in that other office, but you work for me. And when you're traveling all over the world, dealing with, how to protect all $100 billion in assets, I want to know what you're doing. And I said, okay. And then this Admiral Cooper, who was subland at the time, Submarine Force Atlantic Fleet at the time, decided to share what I was doing with the other type commanders, whether it was Air, Marines, Coast Guard, Surface, whatever. His philosophy was, if what we have will benefit the entire fleet, if what you're doing is of this great a benefit and I worked with SEAL Team 6, we went out nights testing all the stuff that I'm putting in the fleet. I had SEAL Team 6 as an advisor. Then he wanted to share it. So I earned respect, and that enabled me to be promoted and to feel that I was part of a team. And submarine force is a small community. You screw up or you're difficult, you are well known for that. So I learned a great deal about, it's not about whether you're male or female. Can you do the job? Can you get the job done? Are you going to complain about it? Or are you going to just put yourself out there and find another way to handle someone who might not be comfortable with you? Maybe it's not their fault. Let's find a way around it.
I agree with what you just said, and I think that's how it should be going for, in today's world. But when you get out in the civilian world, it's a totally different world than what we deal with in other places. Now, all right, so you started a computer company when you got out. How long did you do to the computer company?
I developed software that would run your home on a Macintosh, a little tiny Macintosh computer, and it was super cute. I was about 10 years too early with it. I own all the patents. I own all the trademarks. But Apple Computer left. John Scully took over. Apple Computer went down the tubes, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or so it seemed. And I had to close my company. I paid off my investors. It took me 7 years, but I paid them back. And I started, through a chain of events, studying metaphysics, the physics beyond what you think you know. And the more I studied it, and I've always been a very psychic individual, and the more I studied it, the more I realized that really is my passion for the rest of my life. And, you can't be in 20 years without listening to all these submariners tell you what happened to them and their gut feeling, or I knew this was going to happen, or I had a feeling we were going to have a collision and I tried to stop it and this was going to happen. So I started accumulating not only those stories, but starting to apply. And the longer I was in the Navy, the more significant my psychic ability became. And then after I closed the company, I tried to figure out what to do. And then I had several significant events. And from that point on, all I've done is use this ability to help other people, especially the dead, because I ended up having an awful lot of ghosts contact me, because that's what you want, but it's what happens.
How did ghosts contact you? Are you talking when you were in the Navy, or are you talking after?
It happened. I was at a party with the admiral who ran, who was the group commander in Naples, Italy, and chief of naval operations was there, and I was having this psychic attack, like somebody's trying to tell me something, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I knew there was somebody there. I couldn't see him. I thought, did something happen to my husband? It's this feeling, and you can't explain it. And I was a little bit new on that path. And then the next day, I had to. We got a Red Cross message, and a sailor's grandfather died. Well, his grandfather raised him, And I had to sit him down, and I had to very gently explain to him that we have the Red Cross message that your grandfather died. And all of a sudden I could see his grandfather standing next to him, and that's who was trying to get my attention. And he was so heartbroken he never got to see his grandson again, and he adored this grandson. And you don't think that you're going to be able to feel this, but all of a sudden you can. And I wasn't the only naval officer who could feel it. There were several other officers who were feeling things too. We were also in NATO buildings. The buildings we were in were NATO buildings, but they were built by the Nazis in World War II. And we could hear people screaming on upper floors if you had the duty in some of those old buildings at Av South. Armed Forces Southern Europe was Av South. So you could hear them screaming. And I mean, standing watch was terrifying. And I thought, am I the only one? So I started asking, are you guys hearing anything? And I'm hearing person after person after person say that they hear it, but they can't tell anybody because, you're a naval officer. So after we left Italy, we moved to Charleston, South Carolina, to an 18-month-old house that was so profoundly haunted, we thought we would go mad. Then we discovered our neighborhood was haunted. And we started investigating with real estate agents. And I started to do the research. How do I move a ghost on? What do I do? It took me a lot of years to figure it out. And then through a chain of events, I discovered I could remote view. Once you can remote view, then you see them. Now you have a whole new ability. And I started crossing over the dead. And once I did that, they didn't come back. And then I discovered that most people don't know how to cross over the dead. And it's like, well, gee, now I have a new mission. I can help the living and the dead. So that is what I will do till my last breath. And I've written 8 books on it. The 9th book is supposed to come out this month.
All right. Question for you. When you say remote viewing, is that kind of like what the CIA tried to get people to do?
Absolutely. You see through walls and doors. You can see anywhere on the planet with the correct coordinates. Clear houses. There are spiritual laws that apply to remote viewing, and no one ever talks about that. And this book that's coming out, Psychic Children, Psychic People, that's going to be explained, because there are a lot of people who remote view, and they create a lot of harm. And I will be educating people on how this works and why you need to pay attention to that kind of thing.
What do you mean a lot of harm?
I had an individual contact me because he wanted me to remote view the brain of his neighbor and get him to pay back a debt. Another man wanted me to remote view another person and change their way of thinking. Somebody wanted me to remote view a house so they could see if something was stolen and then there. And it's like, I'm sorry, I can't just go do that for you. I have no jurisdiction. I have no permission. Well, you could just do it. They would never know. Well, unfortunately, spiritual law applies in any dimension. You wouldn't just walk in somebody's house unannounced. You wouldn't just go peer in their bedroom at night when they're sleeping. You'd be arrested. It's against civil law. It's also against spiritual law. And I explain that to in different podcasts that I do and in the books that I write, how this works and why you have to pay attention to these things.
Do you feel that people still don't take you super serious? They're skeptics.
Oh, they absolutely take me seriously.
Not everybody does.
There are very few. After they sit down, I've had physicians change their mind completely about ghosts because I explain the physics of metaphysics. If energy is neither created nor destroyed, what happens to the animation energy when you die? They know that the physical body loses a certain percentage of weight. So the soul, which lives forever, that energy which is not destroyed, has to go somewhere. That's physics 101.
Where does it go?
That's just basic science. Where does it go? If you ask a minister, they say, oh, we don't talk about that. I'm sorry, why not? Let's take this airy-fairy and throw it out and go back to basic science and really explain this so that people can wrap their brain around it and and understand it, and it's not fearful anymore.
So where do they go?
We live in the third dimension, time, space, and gravity. You can't have time and space without gravity, which anchors you in the third dimension. But we move from the mortal frame, which is temporary, to the fourth dimension. When you say a prayer, it passes through the fourth dimension. This is the essence of understanding string theory and quantum entanglement. So when you begin to put those pieces together, now you're in a different dimension and you're so surprised. It's like, wow, I didn't become compost. I'm still me. I'm still the same personality, and my phone doesn't work. And I mean, my brother called me several years ago. He was a contract negotiator for a Screen Actors Guild in Hollywood, and a producer friend of his was hit by a car. And he didn't deal with ghosts. He always called me, and he said, I can see her. She's standing by the side of the road. You've got to go find her and cross her over. Okay. And through his connection to her, I found her, and she doesn't understand she died. She's completely clueless that she's dead. And she can actually see me. I know this must sound unusual, but she can see me talking to her, because through remote viewing, I become visible to her in the fourth dimension. And I had to explain, you were hit by a car. When your car broke down, somebody sideswiped you and killed you. I'm so sorry to tell you this. And her response was, you don't understand. I can't be dead. I have a nail appointment tomorrow. I have a birthday party for my daughter Saturday, and I'm meeting with Paramount and Universal next week. I can't be dead. This is not happening. So I bring in a giant angel. And I said, unfortunately, it is the truth. You have in fact died. And this angel is going to cross you over into that light, which is the fifth dimension. Once you cross over, they'll go over the life just lived. And it will help your family to know that you're not standing next to them, or you have no idea that you've died. And she crossed over. And as soon as she crossed over, he called me and he said, I can feel that she's gone now. And so I get phone calls from different parts of the world. Can you help me with? And I wrote something called the Crossing Over Prayer, and I put it actually in this book.
I saw, you have a book, right?
And it's 88 prayers that help the living and the dead. And people all over the world are using this to cross over their loved ones. You shouldn't have to pay a medium to cross over your child who dies, or your grandmother, or your husband. You should be able to do this in the privacy of your own home. So it's one of the greatest services, because let me assure you, understanding this, helping the dead, is absolutely going to be the compassion you will want for yourself. And not being afraid of death will bring you enormous peace while you live.
Well, it's that whole thing. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. That statement that you hear all the time.
It's a process.
Yeah. Well, and so, all right. So when you're stuck in the fourth dimension, what you just talked about, you're still here, is what you're saying.
You are still able to influence the living, and you're still earning karma. I had a ghost jump in my car at a stoplight and cause my brakes to fail, and I plowed into the back of somebody. And that ghost earned karma. I crossed her over, but she was a very angry woman. And people who say, well, these things, I did see a ghost, or this is happening to me, or I don't understand. These people aren't crazy. They felt something. Something was there. And when you deny it, that's when you have real problems. But if you say, all right, there's a ghost here, I need to do something about it. What are the tools? I had a rocket scientist from NASA call me. He had a house in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And he said, I'll bring all my girlfriends over, and somebody blows in their face or pulls their hair. And, my front light is always on, even though I turn it off. And I brought in an electrician, and I don't believe in ghosts, and I don't believe in you. And I said, dude, you called a psychic. Work with me here. And he said, well, do something. He had a Civil War ghost. She was fascinating. I wrote 3 books, Ghost Stories from the Ghost Point of View, and she's in one of them. She's in the first book. And she was in love with him. So yes, a ghost can be in love with a living mortal person from two different stacks of time. She was in a Civil War stack of time. He was in present day stack of time, but she could see him. That's not always the case, but she could. I crossed her over, and then I checked, make sure there was nobody else there. And I called him back, and he said, my house feels empty now. Like there was somebody here and they're gone, and the light's not on anymore. I don't believe in you, and I don't believe in what you do, but I feel like the ghost is gone. Okay, if that works for you, you help this woman. She's at peace. Good for you.
Yeah, I had a lady come over to my house that I have it's a 1950s house in Modesto, California, and I had this hand carved guy praying, like bent over, and it used to be in my bedroom, master bedroom. This is years ago when I was single, and I kept getting woken up. And she's just like you, and she's like, "There's the person who carved this is coming here to visit it." And so she did whatever she did, and next thing you know, I didn't have that problem anymore.
Right.
And she's like, also move this out into the other room just in case. Don't keep it in your bedroom, put it in a different room. And so
exactly.
we did both of them. Yeah. So. And you know what, there's got to be more than what we know. And there just has to be. I know a lot of people get mad if you say you don't believe in the Bible exactly the way it is, and please don't take that wrong. I'm not saying it's just if you look at the way we come across stuff and how things are told to us and then put down on pieces of paper. It's like the thing that we learned in the Navy, right? You get in a line and you say something to one person and get all the way down to the end, and it's totally changed. So who's to say that some of that stuff when they wrote the books didn't change from the time that they found it until they put it into the book? And that's just my take on that.
Well, the Bible's been rewritten any number of times. And I am not a student of the Bible because I don't know which version I should use. However, what I would offer is that you don't need a building of wood and stone.
No.
You only need your deep and abiding belief in love and in God. And if you have that and a compassion for humanity, I mean, one of the greatest things I heard a submariner say is, we always had a successful mission if we never fired a weapon in anger. So there's a lot to be said for deterrence. So I believe that the more you can do, whether they're living or dead, it makes a huge difference. I mean, I have so many different stories, but one of my favorite ones is a woman in upstate New York whose father was an executed murderer, and he was haunting her, and she had a 4-year-old daughter. And this murderous ghost was telling his daughter to murder his granddaughter. And the chilling thing was the granddaughter could hear it. And so she found out about me and called me and said, can you cross my father over? I mean, he's terrifying. And I said, oh, of course I can, but it's going to be much more powerful if you do it. You can use a crossing over prayer. I have a crossing over prayer for murderers. And people say, well, why would you cross over a murderer? They deserve to go to hell. Well, there's a little problem with that. And if you cross over a murderer, then you cross them into the heaven world, and they go to that location in that realm based on their frequency and the karma they created in each life. Then it's not like they're going to, through the pearly gates to sit on a cloud. That karma goes with them. And so she said, all right, I'll try. So she used the crossing over prayer, and she said it 3 times. She said it repeatedly. And finally, her daughter says, Mommy, the bad man is gone now. So she could do this in the privacy of her own home. She didn't need a medium. It's empowering to feel that you don't have to be afraid of a ghost anymore. And you can be private about it. If you feel like your home is haunted, this prayer is on my websites, ghosthelpers.com or tinaerwin.com. That prayer on the websites is free. Anyone can use it. If you have a child who dies, if you have an alcoholic who dies, I have special prayers for that in the Crossing Over Prayer book. The book does actually really well. It's extremely specific prayers. Because if someone has cancer and you say, "Oh, I'll pray for you," what prayer are you saying? So there's a prayer for helping someone who has cancer. Prayers connect you to the divine. They connect you to that fifth dimension realm. They change your frequency and make it higher. There's an awful lot of talk about frequency right now, whether it's weather frequency, wink, wink, or other things. The higher your frequency, the healthier you will be over time and in future lives and after death. And if you know what to do when death comes, you're going to feel even more empowered.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to know this stuff because just like I said earlier about people worried about, I was in the Navy, I was a corpsman, I worked EMT, I did all that. I saw a lot of death. I saw a lot of stuff. And so for me, when people pass away, it doesn't affect me as much as somebody who's never had anybody pass away. For me, it's not a big deal. People say so-and-so passed away. It's like, oh, well, we're getting older. That's going to happen. We're not going to be here forever. So it's one thing I had a question though, is how did you come up with the prayers?
I dropped my iPhone and I went to Fashion Valley in San Diego to get it repaired at the Apple store. And I was early, so I went to a handbag shop. And I was talking to the ladies and they asked me what I did. And I told them and they said, the store is haunted. Can you clear the ghosts from the store? So I said, sure. Let me know how it goes. So she called me 2 days later and she said, well, they're gone, but we think we have more. And I thought, all right. So I sat down and I wrote this prayer, and I really think I had a lot of help from the other side. And I beta tested it with the manager of the store. It was a very high-end handbag store. And the sales representatives in the store. And they were able to clear the ghosts. And there were a lot of homeless behind that particular shopping mall. And they liked seeing the women. And they were able to cross all of those men over repeatedly. One woman's husband was a physician, and so he would come home and every night they'd be irritable and they were fighting. So she asked me, what do you think is causing that? I said, well, he works in an emergency room. Maybe he's bringing somebody home. Why don't you say the prayer every time he walks through the front door? See what happens. Just experiment with it. What's the worst? She said it completely changed their marriage. He would come home angry and grumpy, and she would quietly say the prayer, and his whole demeanor changed. The atmosphere in their home changed. And so he actually came to see me. We had a conversation, and he began to understand how he could use it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you're dealing with life and death. Death happens. My niece died at the age of 6. My brother died at the age of 60. Death comes. We don't all live 100 years. But if you can come to terms with it and then learn how you can be of the greatest service, then you've done something really, really wonderful. And then you get on with your day.
Tina, it's been great having you on Helping the Brave because you're helping everybody, ghosts and everybody. But getting to know your background in the Navy and then what you're doing now, I really appreciate you sharing your story today.
Thank you so much for having me. I just, love being on your show.
Well, it was a pleasure having you here. And if people can go to ghosthelpers.com, or you said tinaerwin.com, is that correct?
Yes, Tina Erwin with an E. Either one. The prayers on both of them, and all the books are there if you're curious.
There you go. Go check out her stuff. It'll also be on the show notes for you. And again, Tina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Ed.